Hi, I'm Wayne Heilman, business reporter for the Gazette. We're doing a 150th anniversary of Colorado Springs story on the contributions of Thomas Maclaren to the architecture of Colorado Springs. I have with me Jim Childs and from HTNB, right? HNTB, I'm sorry. And Sheva Whilloughby from the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, who's both are with the AIA Colorado. That's the American Institute of Architects, correct?
That's correct.
And I'll kick it over to both Jim and Sheva to kind of talk a little bit more about yourselves.
So I'm a Colorado native. I grew up here. I actually went to CU Boulder, their School of Environmental Design, and then my master's at CU Denver. So that's a nice connection to Thomas. I have worked at a variety of firms around Colorado, and I was at RTA here in Colorado Springs for quite some time, and now I'm the architect at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo.
Okay, thanks Sheva. Jim Childs, I'm an architect. I graduated from Kansas State University in 1978 and moved out here to work for an architect by the name of Carlisle Guy, who does have quite a bit of history in the architecture field here in Colorado Springs. I spent 5 years with Carlisle working at projects around the Broadmoor. Felt very blessed to be able to do that. I opened my own firm and have worked generally for 20-some years owning and operating my own firm. Have worked 5 years out of state doing a court building in Long Beach, as well as a career doing golf properties, and most recently worked with HNTB, and I work at the airport on the concourse expansion projects at DIA.
Tell us a little bit about your connection with Thomas Maclaren, Jim.
Well, as I started doing the research, I was quite surprised to find the number of connections that do exist. One of the first was at Claremont, which is now the Colorado Springs School. When I was an apprentice for Carlisle Guy, we added buildings to that facility for the school. Also was hired to master plan the facility in the 90s to add gymnasium and more classrooms, and obviously to go through the planning process of it's a non-conforming use in a residential area to get that done. It's called Claremont, but it was a three-quarter replica of the Versailles at Trianon. So essentially, I'll say 3 generations of architecture being involved on the same kind of facilities. Also did a tremendous amount of work at the quote Broadmoor Golf Club that Thomas did as the casino for the Broadmoor. That was in existence until the early 1990s when it was demolished for the new golf club. There are others, but that's probably enough for now.
This building too, though, right?
Excuse me?
This building too.
Yeah.
This building. I was asked to restore this by El Pomar in 1992, one of the most fun and rewarding projects I've ever worked on in my career. Such a wonderful opportunity to be able to touch the history of Colorado Springs and the Penroses and make this a facility that the community now is able to utilize for nonprofit events.
Tell me a little bit about, from your both of your perspectives, what Thomas Maclaren's contribution is to our historical building inventory.
I mean, it's a huge contribution. I would say he did so many of the, what I'm saying historic, but I mean it loosely, not necessarily on the National Register, but so many of our public buildings and so many residential places. But I think without that, I mean, and he brought, although there are different styles, I mean, he brought that kind of his uniform style to Colorado Springs, and I think really I wouldn't say he's responsible for bringing the City Beautiful movement here, but really helped kick off the beautifying of downtown and making it a place where people want to be, with these timeless buildings that are still largely intact. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's well said, Sheva. And for me, and I'm generally a generation or two earlier than you in the practice of architecture, but he in so many ways epitomizes what we all think of architects are. He provided a service to the community. There were different entities like City Hall, the City Auditorium, and has such a wide array of project types with churches and schools and public venues, like one of my favorites is Patty Jewett. And he was able to provide a service, to provide design skills, which obviously were quite extensive. He is technically, I would say, an artist by background with some of the history that he provided. And he turned all of those different building types into a built environment that we still enjoy, that we still are a part of and are important to the values and the activities that so much of our community has. A lot of people may recognize that, most people don't, but the term was used in researching his history of art and bringing art to what we do. And as architects, we generally have artistic skills, some a lot better than others. And he also epitomized that with his ability to create such special buildings, but also what is behind the scenes that so much of the public is not aware is melding the systems that go in, the structure, the mechanical, the heating, plumbing, all of those systems that go into making a building usable into these glorious pieces of architecture that we in many cases still use. And in, like, example, Penrose House, he did not design this, he did some of the other facilities, but to be able then to restore a building into these new uses. City Hall is a good example, a nice building that sat vacant for a number of years and then was restored to house many of the, quote, political activities in terms of the city council and other events that go in that shape our city. Those exist in a facility that he designed. And I think as an architect, we all look for the opportunity to have facilities that we are a part of be relevant to the community. And that speaks so highly to his longevity and his amount of work that he was able to accomplish in the short time that he was here.
Yeah, I think it's amazing his breadth of different project types, and just that they were functional then and are still functional now, and they're really quite beautiful and understated. I mean, it gave Colorado Springs sort of its own local architectural style, and I think he did a good job of respecting the natural environment and integrating. I mean, it could be argued he could have done lots of things differently to integrate it better, but I mean, in terms of just how they fit within the landscape and they're not trying to be hidden, but they're not necessarily directly competing either. It's really quite a nice fit for our geography, I think, and I think that's one reason they've been able to be timeless in a way, is that they're just the right level of competitiveness and beauty on their own, but they sit well within where they're sited, rather.
And to also have that ability to be, for example, I'd love to have gone back to his studio and been a part of that, but to know that here he is working on all of those just grand details of the Grace Episcopal Church, while he may be creating a residence for a family that had commissioned him to provide a wonderful home for them to live in, and to go between project types seamlessly and eloquently is just speaks very highly for his not only business acumen, but his ability to excel in the service industry that we're all in.
Yeah, and I think in researching a little bit too, it sounds like, and you can see it in the different styles of between building types, and even the different styles between similar building types, that he was able to provide or to respond to the client's needs and still keep his own sense of style and architecture, but give them exactly what they were asking for, rather than, you know, you often see works of architecture that are clearly an architect's style imposed on a client's needs or wants. And so it's really nice to see that he was able to, I like that word, eloquently blend, you know, his own sense of style and their needs and function and systems all together. So he really was an artist in that sense, I think.
Tell me a little bit about Mclaren's style. What was his style?
I think his style, I mean, he did a lot of, I would say, classical revivalist and Gothic revivalist buildings. But I think his style was really taking some of those styles and a lot of what he learned in Europe and the European styles, and really making them fit here in this landscape and this environment. I mean, there's lots of elements about many of his works that are fit to a T, you know, classical revivalist style. But I think he had tweaks and things that really made it kind of a local architecture. And you might have some more.
Sure, and one of the things when you get to public buildings, there's a description called the dignity of the facility, like the dignity of the courts. Well, when you look at the City Hall or Ivy-Wide School or many of those projects, if you just look in general terms when you're viewing the facility, you see that the entrance to them is well raised from what might be the ground level that you would see it from. And that provides, in the most simple of terms, this air of dignity about that facility. So it is perceived, with no one really knowing why, but perceived as having more importance than it might be that if it were just placed directly on the ground. But I do think one of his successes, and Sheva mentioned this earlier, is his ability to create a design solution based on the challenge or the commission at hand. And he wasn't creating one exact style and making that fit with each one of his commissions. Mm-hmm. And to me, this gets back to the art, the success of art and architecture, which also lies in the beholder. So some people may drive around, may walk around and see things that are pleasing to them. Some may see things that are potentially not so pleasing to them. But he seemed to have an eye to create this art, this architectural solution that was appropriate based on the challenge, the program, the scope that was given to him, and have it be a, quote, success of individuality, not a success of a group of structures. And I do find that successful. And thinking back in time, it's a little easier for me to do that than some of you because I've been back there. But to think back in time of sitting with the client, sitting with the city official, sitting with the church board or group that made the decisions, what was he asked to do? What was he asked to create? And those are the inner workings of architecture that I quite enjoy, but I would love to have been in those rooms back there to have a knowledge of what was he asked to do. Was he given a direct list of you're going to provide this and this and this, or was he hired to produce, create a solution based on, well, you're the architect, and I've
Right,
heard this
we need
so
a
many
city hall.
times.
Go.
You're the architect, you tell me what we need. And and I am guessing, major assumption, that he was given a little more free rein, partly because it was of the time, where he was, the term architect, master builder was the knower of all in terms of construction and design. And I am assuming he was given a lot more freedom than how the profession has potentially progressed to today. And he excelled at it, obviously was quite prolific. I'd love to know how many individuals were sitting, young architects sitting in the back room,
Feverishly drafting away.
potentially dingy light compared to what we're used to having now, all hand drafting on these wonderful sheets of linen, as it was at the time, creating these just works of art, detailing railings and the cornices and corbels and all the architectural elements that make his design so special.
How many buildings did he do in Colorado Springs? Do we know?
I thought I heard somewhere around 200. I don't know that for sure. But
I have read that. I do not know that personally, but that was part of the research. And over 35 years, 200 projects, you divide that up. He had
he's busy.
very, very busy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's
Very,
a
very
number-
prolific. So obviously, I'm assuming again, but he had a number of people working with him to produce not only that amount of documentation, but the other part in those days, the amount of time required out on the site while something is being constructed to help direct and interpret those plans would have taken a heavy time toll on those doing that work.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure it was even more so than now because construction documents have changed so much, and there's, not to say there wasn't lots of detail in them before, but it was a different type of detailing and less specific direction and more interpretive, and I would assume more emphasis on site direction. And so yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, he must have been really busy.
Yes.
When we maybe roll forward another 50 or 100 years, what do you think all these buildings will still be here, and what do you see the future as of Thomas Maclaren's legacy?
Really, really good question. So I would assume the majority of them would be here. They were built to last, and in many ways have lasted a century or more. I see no reason that they would not be in use. If we look at City Hall, for example, it was restored to today's use, and one of the things behind the scenes that we as architects are asked to do is we have the physical structure. There's all of the systems that are in those facilities to take care of life safety, smoke evacuation, heating and cooling, and the accessibility requirements that so everyone can utilize the facility as it is currently intended. I don't see that really changing that much. Now, you never know. We mentioned City Hall has been challenged over the years with what it could be used for.
You mean City Hall?
Yeah, City Auditorium.
Excuse me, yes, City Auditorium, thank you. So that one may be a challenge, but Ivy Wide School has a wonderful new life with retail and activities for the public to come and enjoy food and drink and other type of elements. So I see no reason that they wouldn't be still in use.
Yeah, I would agree. I would hope that they would still be in use and still be around, because as you said, there's no reason to get rid of them. Potentially remodel them, some of them on the interior again, but I think, and you know, as we start pushing forward in architecture in general to be more sustainable and think about the built environment all the time in what we're doing, it makes sense to reuse what we already have if we're able to. And so maybe we're upgrading systems and making things more efficient, but we should continue to use it if it's available. And there's such amazing buildings that there's no reason not to, I think.
Sometimes urban renewal poses a threat to these buildings, right?
Yeah, is City Auditorium on the Historic Register?
I believe that it is.
I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember watching, and I might misspeak, I think it was on PBS. There was this great thing not that long ago about the lost architecture of Colorado Springs. And one of them that made me so sad was the Antlers Hotel.
Yes.
It was a beautiful building, and I'm not saying it's not beautiful now, it just was really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is often that
challenge?
Well, it is a challenge, but it's, you know, the architects of the current time are deciding, you know, or the society of like, oh, we're not into this style anymore, we're not into this use, or we need everything to be these big open multifunction building, you know, whatever people are deciding is relevant at the time. And if they're not, or they're forward thinking in a different way or a different direction, then that's really what challenges these buildings, because that's where they get threatened to be torn down. And you know, sometimes unfortunately what we're seeing in architecture and construction is that there's more incentive to just tear a building down than there is to renovate it and to make it work. And sometimes that's a financial challenge, right, that the client or the owner might not have enough money to renovate the building to fit their needs and to make it safe for fire or accessible for, so those are all challenges, and those are ways that the building gets threatened. But, you know, seeing it from both sides, the owner might not be able to make that work. And so, you know, I don't know what the answer is to that, but it's always really sad when these amazing buildings get threatened because of reasons like that. And I'm not advocating that all buildings, just because they're old, should stay. I mean, that's not always the best choice, but it's a bummer when you see a good one go.
I think you touched on an important point, Sheva, in that not always are all of the facts known by what the end decision is. And in some cases, you mentioned life safety and building systems, and there may not be an efficient way to provide what's required by code today.
Yeah.
Or it may just be so astronomically expensive it doesn't make sense. And those are incredibly difficult decisions for those who are part of that process to make.
Right, because no matter how much you might love that building and want so badly to make it work, if it's not going to be safe for occupants, then, you know, no one's wanting to take on that risk and responsibility and say, well, I mean, it probably isn't going to burn down on you, but you should be fine. So, yeah, I mean, it is an incredibly difficult conversation on how you arrive. And that, I mean, and you always want to believe that's what happened, and someone wasn't just like, oh, take it down, it's fine, I don't want, you know, I want this open space. You want to believe that they had those conversations and they tried, and it is what it, you know, unfortunately that was the way.
Well, West Middle.
Yeah.
Pretty good example, right? There's been rumors that D11 wants to knock it down. And I think that, you know, that's a Mclaren building.
Yeah.
To me, that would be tragic. But, you know, can they repurpose it?
Right, and that's the conversations behind the closed doors that everyone doesn't get to hear. I mean, maybe it's, and especially like schools are so different now than they were, with all of the challenges and threats and crazy things that we never could dream of that we would be facing today. I mean, having to plan for those things, and so it just might not be viable to be repurposed. You know, it's hard to say.
Well, we have another few minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
Do you guys have any closing thoughts that you'd like to make about Thomas or his work?
Well, I do applaud you for celebrating architecture and architects. Obviously, as part of the AIA, that's something that we are here to do, and personally and professionally for me, to have an opportunity to talk about architecture, the success of architecture, some little nuances about what may or may not go on behind the scenes for what we do, and to mainly, though, celebrate the history of Colorado Springs. I know I love Colorado Springs. Have enjoyed just a myriad of projects, and want to take the time to thank all of those who were, quote, clients and or commissioned me and others that were able to work here. It's just a fabulous opportunity to be able to showcase what good architecture is, what the art of architecture is, and I do feel very fortunate, Wayne, that you asked for our participation in this, and as could be the case with 40 plus years of doing this, I have hours and hours of stories to tell that might bore a lot of people to death, but very happy to have time to share some of those with you and others as we wrap this up.
Well, I can't beat that. That was perfect. No, I think I would echo the same thing. It's really great to have great architecture showcase, and obviously being part of American Institute of Architects, that means a lot to us. And yeah, Colorado Springs is a great city to work in, and having these Thomas Maclaren's work sort of setting the tone for the type of the type of architecture that I would like to do. I mean, not exactly his style, but just something that's timeless like that, and just able to really stand the test of time, I think is amazing. And I don't know, I guess that's really all you said it great, Jim, so I think I'll leave it at that.
This has been a roundtable discussion of the significance of Thomas Maclaren's work in Colorado Springs. We thank you all for watching. Look for more of these videos on Gazette.com.